Hello and welcome back, and it's another Before You Buy. And of course today, you've already seen the title card, we're talking about something that's proper enterprise. We're talking about something very top end, generally not something that people that are going down this route of buying dual controller NAS systems are going to be looking at a video like this. But still, nonetheless, the idea of a dual controller architecture server is fast becoming something that isn't just the top end anymore. A lot of people in the lower tiers are actually starting to embrace it in lots of different ways, with different NAS brands offering something known as high availability in a number of ways. So today I want to talk about 5 reasons why you may want to consider a dual controller network attached storage device in your business environment, and 5 reasons why you might be just throwing your money away and you shouldn't bother. But before we go any further, a few disclaimers off the bat. Yes, we're still recording this video like the others with building work happening behind me, so some of that might seep through. I apologise in advance. Secondly, we are talking about some serious enterprise high-grade equipment in today's video, generally almost exclusively in rack mount form. Although we don't have one on the table, bear in mind that all the points that I'm talking about today apply to a number of different brands, although there will be times in this video where I will talk about Synology more than anything else, because there's a few things they've done that other people haven't that are slowly being disseminated into other brands as well. So I will focus on them a little bit in this video, but I'll try not to be too exclusive about it. But without further ado, let's get straight into it. Reason number 1 that you might want to look at a dual controller NAS is simply that a dual controller NAS provides 2 different architectures even within that. Now, for those that aren't aware, and I should really have top-ended the video with this, a dual controller NAS is a system that has 2 motherboards, 2 CPUs, 2 sets of memory, 2 lots of controllers on the rear, ports, everything. Effectively, it is 2 NASes inside a single chassis. Sometimes they share the storage, sometimes it's a storage-less device and you have to connect storage, and that's a whole different thing. But predominantly, that is what we are talking about today. Dual everything. And even within that subset, it's good to know that dual controller architecture NASes arrive in 2 variants: active-active and active-passive, both of which have their advantages. Active-active is when you have 2 controllers inside that are constantly doing either the same operation or, in some cases, allow the end user to harness the hardware resources of both towards single tasks. Active-passive is when you have 2 controllers running, but one is kind of like the backup. It sits there mirroring the other one, but if the primary controller fails, the other one is immediately there to take up the slack. Now again, these different architectures have their own advantages and disadvantages. Like, for example, if you have an active-active, if you're doing some processes that are using both sets of CPU and memory to a single task, if one of these controllers dies, the single controller will have to try to do the job of 2 controllers. And again, sometimes that can lead to tremendous bottlenecks, but still, nonetheless, the ability to have 2 lots of CPU and memory and architecture at your disposal is certainly an appealing reason to look at dual controller NAS systems. Reason number 2 that you might want to look at a dual controller NAS architecture is because generally any dual controller NAS system has insane hardware. I mean, yes, there's always 10 GBE, that should be a given, but on top of that, you end up with crazy high-grade Xeon processors. You end up with generally memory supported up to about 128 gig to start with, and then you get into some of the 1/4 of a terabyte, 1/2 a terabyte, and in some cases terabyte memory support. You end up with systems with insane levels of hardware internally and externally, and generally you never see a dual controller NAS that's got meh hardware inside. So when you're buying a dual controller NAS, you can rest assured that you are getting a system with a tremendous amount of horsepower under both of the respective bonnets. Reason number 3 that you might want to look at dual controller NASs is it is a more complete redundant solution. If you do look at any of the currently available redundant and dual controller NAS solutions, generally in rack mount, from QNAP and Synology, just to pick that, and then you can go real high tier out of the traditional NAS vendors, you will find that not only have you got 2 controllers, but generally you have got RAID, of course, supported on all of those storage drives. You have got redundant PSUs built in as well, and some of them even have BBUs, battery packs inside for flushing the cache safely and completing and safely tying off read-write actions internally in the event of one of those many parts falling off. So dual controller NAS systems generally are a more complete redundant solution with that redundant controller, redundant storage, redundant PSU, and some cases internal power packs to help finish off those transactions. A real complete and fail-safe safety net solution overall. Reason number 4, you might want to look at dual controller NAS. This leans very heavily on that point about the architecture inside. Dual controller NASs can support everything. Anything a brand says that their software can do, anything they say they offer, pretty much you're always going to be able to do them on a redundant powered NAS. So if you're buying a redundant powered NAS, a redundant controller NAS, know that there is practically nothing that the brand offers that isn't on there. There's only a few rare exceptions that I've ever seen, one of which being a lot of the deep video analysis available on some of the Synology surveillance NASs, but with that minor exception aside, a redundant controller NAS does everything that the brands say they will do, regardless of the brand that you go for. Reason number 5, and the final reason there to look at redundant controller NASs, is they always have 5-year warranties. Anywhere you look, they always bang out 5-year warranties because you are buying a system that is heavily hinged on safety. It's heavily hinged on robust, non-stop access, be it with no idle activity or simply with multiple users in different time zones, making this a 24/7 system. That means that the brand provider really has to make sure this thing can take a knock, and consequently they always ensure there are 5-year warranties. And remember, that warranty covers replaced controllers in the event of one failing, so they'll send you a new one. It covers redundant PSUs as well, so if a PSU fails in that 5-year, slot it out, send it to the brand, they'll send one back with even advanced replacement options available in some cases. But ultimately, one of the whole crux of all of those reasons to buy a dual controller PSU, a dual controller NAS, should simply be that you are getting a system that can take a knock, and a system that has so many different safety nets built in. However, all of that stuff, all of those advantages aren't going to be great for everyone. And alongside those 5, there are 5 reasons why you should perhaps give dual controller NASs a miss overall. Reason number 1, just because there are active-passive and active-active dual controller NASs out there doesn't necessarily mean that the ones that you are looking at support it. And a number of dual controller NASs do not support active-active. Active-active has to be stipulated very clearly when you're looking at these devices. Even Synology, in their range of dual controller NAS systems, you will find throughout their range that a number of them are active-passive and some of them are active-active. Same goes for QNAP as well. You see lots and lots of systems where they can't harness that extra hardware, and a number of you that are budgeting your NAS solution for business may look at the fail-safe of a dual controller, look at failure rates on controller boards and CPUs and see they're not actually that high, and just think, do you know what, that money could be better spent elsewhere. And active-passive is just not doing it for you if you can't utilise all of the lovely hardware that's largely sitting idle and unused. So bear that in mind if that is your own architecture. Reason number 2 that you might want to consider giving dual controller NASs a miss is simply because of something known as high availability that we touched on at the top of the video. High availability comes in many forms, and one of the ones we talked about the most on the channel is Synology High Availability, SHA. Now, SHA is when you have 2 NASs connected together. They've got to be identical systems. So, for example, if it's 920s, DS920s, you need 2 920s with the same hard drive variants inside in the same RAID configuration, the same network interfaces, and they are connected by a kind of heartbeat cable. Now, everything that happens in the data that is sent to these systems will be committed to both devices. It's still an active passive setup with a primary and a secondary device, but you can wire these two NASes together, and it can work out so much lower in price than buying a redundant controller NAS. Obviously, a lot of that saving is because you're not buying these behemoth Xeon rack mount solutions, but if the appeal of a redundant controller NAS, is in your wheelhouse and in your budget, but at the same time, you're not going to max out a Xeon, you're not going to max out 10G, you're not going to max out 128 gig, then chances are a standard high availability setup of connecting two NASes that are identical with a heartbeat cable, and again that can be LAN or USB in some cases depending on the brand, can often be a far more affordable and more cost-effective choice, and also allow you to use that budget that you're saving towards better mid-range desktops, better mid-range rack mount, or better storage overall. Reason number 3 that you might want to consider, not to consider I should say, a redundant controller NAS is shared storage. Now I mentioned right at the top of the video that dual controller NASes actually come in a slightly different form, and it's kind of gone out of fashion over the last few years, but Synology themselves did this along with QNAP in other forms. They came up with effectively mainframe controller NAS systems that didn't actually have any storage in them. It was, I believe Synology called them the RC series, and they were it was a device that you then connected the storage to it, generally with quite high performance external connections, but these are systems that are kind of overseeing high availability. They are dual controller systems that have got dual CPU, dual memory, etc., but have NAS storage connected to them via either expansion devices or in some cases actual standalone NAS systems. And the shared storage system inherent to most modern high availability is quite contrary to everything we described, because although modern dual controller systems have got that 2 CPU, 2 memory, 2 motherboard connections, etc., the majority of these new systems, the UC3200s, the SA3400D, or 3200D, these systems share the storage. So it's a 12-bay solution, for example, and both controllers are connecting to the same storage pool, which for a lot of people they're not in love with. Yes, you've got RAID 5, RAID 6, etc., and RAID 50s and RAID 60s in large scale cases, but a number of users don't quite like the idea that despite the fact they've got dual of all of this stuff, they've only got one storage array, and all it takes is one thing to catastrophically damage the singular storage array beyond the recovery of RAID, and all of that redundant redundant parity means nothing. So again, bear in mind that the majority of modern dual controller solutions share the storage, which not everyone is going to be in love with. I know a number of users seemingly think the storage is cut down the middle, and a 12-bay is actually 6 and 6. It's not. It's a single 12-bay storage area. You can partition it into different volumes and all that stuff if you want, and different storage pools, but the fact still remains it's shared. Reason number 4 that you might not want to buy a dual controller NAS comes down to it being exclusively rack mount. We already touched on this a little, but it is worth diversifying into. If you like the idea of a dual controller NAS, and you like the idea of a system that can withstand a full motherboard, CPU and memory failure, know that you can only get this in a rack mount solution. Whether it's for reasons of scale, heat dissipation and power consumption, there's still no avoiding that if you are looking at this, you are kind of limited to rack mount. I know a number of users, rack mount is just not possible. They don't have a rack mount arrays, they can't bear the noise and the physical space taken from it, the power consumption. Rack mount storage solutions are generally hyper devices in most regards, and a number of us that just want the safety net of having a dual controller system aren't in love with the idea of all of the all-encompassing hindrance of a rack mount in a smaller environment, and that leans back to going for an SHA environment rather than that of a full contained dual controller environment. And reason number 5 that we've already touched on, but I do think it's worth again zooming in a bit more, is power consumption. redundant controller NASs are hungry beasts in every regard, not only because of their dual architecture, but generally they have to be kept tremendously cool. So they have a variety of active cooling systems. They have large PSUs because if you have a dual controller environment, you don't get one PSU each. What you've got is generally 2 PSUs per controller. So you end up with either a 4 PSU environment or a 2 PSU environment with enormous 1,000, 1,500 watt PSUs that, although you're not generally going to use all of that power unless you're really maxing the system out with more PSU cards and more, it has to be said that still the base level of power consumption is very, very high when running these devices because of the dual controller environment, because of the active cooling systems, because of the redundant PSUs, because of the whole system being a rack mount and all of the power concerns and heat and temperature considerations that factors. Dual controller systems, singular contained dual controller systems, are hungry, hungry beasts. So you have to bear that in mind. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I hope it's helped you decide whether your budget should be going towards a dual controller NAS solution. Thank you so much for watching. If you did, click like. If you do want to learn more, click subscribe and go to the links in the description to all of the systems we talked about today. But apart from that, I will see you next time.